GOP Congressman Andy Harris publicly endorsed the FBI's decision to arrest a Wisconsin judge for allegedly obstructing the enforcement of federal immigration laws. Federal law is unequivocal in stating that no public official has the right to interfere with immigration enforcement processes. By supporting the FBI's move, Harris underscored the seriousness of the judge's actions, framing them not as a mere legal misstep, but as a direct violation of national immigration policy. The political implications extend beyond this single case. It highlights a broader battle over federal authority, immigration policy, and judicial independence. In a climate where immigration remains one of America's most divisive issues, Harris's stance signals a hardening Republican narrative around strict immigration enforcement and judicial accountability. Congressman Andy Harris emphasized that federal law is unequivocal. Public officials are strictly prohibited from obstructing the enforcement of immigration statutes. He argued that the Wisconsin judge knowingly violated these clear legal boundaries, undermining the federal government's authority on immigration policy. By framing the situation as a direct breach of codified federal mandates, Harris reinforced the gravity of the offense, suggesting that judicial overreach cannot be tolerated in matters of national immigration control. This stance reflects a broader political undercurrent, where Republican leaders increasingly demand strict adherence to immigration laws, amid growing concerns over border security and judicial activism. Harris's emphasis also resonates with conservative voters who prioritize the supremacy of federal statutes over local or ideological interpretations. Congressman Andy Harris called for the immediate removal of the Wisconsin judge, accusing her of aiding and abetting criminal activity by obstructing federal immigration enforcement. He argued that by interfering with immigration authorities, the judge effectively crossed a legal and ethical line, transforming herself from an impartial arbiter into an active participant in unlawful conduct. Harris's remarks escalate the political and legal stakes, suggesting that judicial officers are not immune from prosecution or disciplinary actions when they undermine federal law. This framing aligns with a broader Republican emphasis on strict immigration enforcement and institutional accountability, reflecting growing frustration over perceived judicial activism obstructing national security efforts. By demanding removal, Harris seeks to reinforce a precedent that even members of the judiciary must face consequences for actions seen as undermining. Congressman Andy Harris voiced strong opposition to granting special exemptions to courts, insisting that ICE agents must retain the authority to arrest immigration violators wherever necessary, including inside courthouses. Harris highlighted that local jails' growing refusal to cooperate with federal immigration authorities has forced ICE to pursue arrests in alternative locations, eliminating any notion of safe havens for immigration violators. He asserted that allowing protected zones for immigration offenders would erode the rule of law, undermining both national security and federal supremacy. This position underscores a broader Republican narrative that no institution, including judicial venues, should be immune from federal immigration operations, especially amid escalating tensions between local jurisdictions and federal agencies. By championing unrestricted operational freedom for ICE, Harris aligns with a hardline approach prioritizing enforcement over political or institutional sensitivities. Shifting the conversation to trade policy, Congressman Andy Harris pointed to President Trump's strategic use of tariff threats as an effective bargaining tool on the global stage. Harris emphasized that Trump's aggressive posture, while controversial, has pressured trading partners into serious negotiations, leveraging economic uncertainty to extract better terms for the United States. This tactic marks a departure from traditional diplomatic norms, introducing hard economic coercion into global trade relations, a move that resonates with Trump's broader America First doctrine. While critics argue that such threats risk destabilizing markets and eroding long-term trust, Harris defended the approach as a necessary recalibration to address years of perceived trade imbalances and unfair practices. Ultimately, Harris framed Trump's tariff threats not as reckless gambits, but as calculated pressure points aimed at restoring U.S. economic strength in a hyper-competitive global environment. U.S. Treasury Secretary reported notable progress in trade negotiations, projecting tangible advancements within the next 90 days, largely attributed to President Trump's carrot-and-stick approach. This strategy blends punitive threats, such as tariffs, with the promise of economic incentives, creating a dynamic where trading partners are simultaneously pressured and enticed into cooperation. Trump's method departs from traditional multilateral diplomacy, relying instead on bilateral pressure points to extract faster concessions, particularly from major economies like China and the European Union. While some economic analysts warn that this high-stakes tactic may generate short-term gains at the risk of long-term instability, the administration remains confident that aggressive bargaining will reshape trade relationships in America's favor. By setting a defined 90-day window for progress, the administration imposes a clear timeline that increases pressure not only on foreign negotiators, but also on domestic markets watching closely for outcomes. Despite several weeks of intense discussions, no formal trade agreements have yet been finalized, increasing pressure on the ongoing negotiation process. The absence of tangible results risks eroding the initial momentum generated by Trump's tariff-driven strategy, testing the patience of both domestic markets and international partners. As deadlines loom, the stakes grow higher. Unresolved negotiations could destabilize investor confidence, disrupt supply chains, and further complicate diplomatic relations with key economic allies. Moreover, prolonged uncertainty undermines the credibility of the carrot-and-stick approach, raising concerns that persistent threats without deliverables may harden opposition among negotiating partners. In this critical window, maintaining pressure while delivering measurable outcomes will be essential to prevent negotiations from collapsing under the weight of unmet expectations. Congressman Andy Harris highlighted that, as a result of current economic strategies, trillions of dollars in investment commitments have been pledged toward the United States. Of particular significance, Harris noted that the pharmaceutical sector alone has secured commitments worth tens of billions of dollars, signaling a substantial boost to America's domestic manufacturing capacity. This influx of capital reflects growing confidence among major industries that the U.S. remains a favorable environment for long-term growth, especially under policies aimed at reshoring strategic sectors. Harris's remarks align with broader national efforts to rebuild critical supply chains, reduce dependency on foreign suppliers, and position the United States as a leader in high-value industries like pharmaceuticals. These investments are poised not only to create high-paying jobs, but also to fortify America's resilience against future global supply disruptions. Congressman Andy Harris argued that President Trump's aggressive use of tariff threats is directly catalyzing investment flows back into the United States. Harris emphasized that by introducing the credible threat of economic penalties, Trump has incentivized companies to relocate operations and capital to U.S. soil rather than risk higher costs abroad. This dynamic not only secures domestic investments, but also revitalizes the American labor market, creating new job opportunities across critical industries previously outsourced overseas. Harris's framing portrays tariff threats not as isolated acts of economic aggression, but as deliberate tools to restructure global supply chains in favor of U.S. economic security. By leveraging uncertainty, the Trump administration aims to transform America from a passive participant into an active architect of its own economy. A recent Fox News poll reveals deep skepticism among Americans regarding the effectiveness of tariffs, with only 32% believing tariffs help the economy, while 55% argue they cause harm. This divide highlights a critical vulnerability in the administration's economic messaging, as public support remains essential for sustaining aggressive trade policies over the long term. The numbers suggest that despite the Trump administration's framing of tariffs as a tool for economic revitalization, many Americans perceive them primarily as cost-increasing measures that hurt consumers and businesses. Moreover, persistent public doubt could limit the administration's negotiating leverage internationally, as trading partners may interpret weak domestic support as a sign of political fragility. Thus, while tariffs may serve strategic purposes, the battle for public perception remains a parallel front that could determine the ultimate success or failure of trade initiatives. According to polling data, Americans remain sharply divided over the impact of tariffs on employment. 36% believe tariffs benefit job creation, while 44% argue they are detrimental. This division underscores the complex and uneven nature of tariff consequences, where some sectors, such as steel and manufacturing, may experience gains, while industries reliant on global supply chains suffer losses. The lack of overwhelming support suggests that many Americans remain unconvinced that protectionist policies can deliver broad-based employment growth without triggering collateral economic damage. Furthermore, this public skepticism complicates efforts to frame tariffs as a straightforward solution to economic dislocation, requiring the administration to navigate both economic realities and political optics carefully. As job markets fluctuate under global trade tensions, maintaining credibility on employment outcomes will be critical for sustaining public and political support. Congressman Andy Harris acknowledged that some localized job losses have occurred, but emphasized that the national unemployment rate has remained virtually unchanged, signaling overall economic stability. Harris's framing suggests that while certain sectors or regions may experience disruption due to trade tensions, the broader labor market has demonstrated resilience against external shocks. By highlighting macroeconomic indicators over anecdotal job losses, Harris aims to reinforce confidence in the administration's economic strategy, portraying isolated layoffs as manageable side effects of broader structural realignment. This approach reflects a deliberate effort to shift focus from negative headlines toward more reassuring metrics that appeal to both investors and voters seeking evidence of economic health. However, maintaining this narrative depends heavily on the continued strength of national employment figures amidst an increasingly volatile global trade environment. Congressman Andy Harris stressed that revitalizing domestic manufacturing is critical, but also advocated relocating production to allied countries if reshoring to the United States proves unfeasible. By emphasizing strategic realignment, Harris outlined a two-pronged approach aimed at reducing America's reliance on China. Either rebuild industrial capacity at home or shift supply chains toward trusted economic partners. This perspective aligns with broader bipartisan concerns that overdependence on China creates vulnerabilities in critical industries such as technology, pharmaceuticals, and defense manufacturing. Harris's position also signals a growing shift in U.S. trade strategy, from prioritizing cost efficiency through globalization to prioritizing national security and economic sovereignty. Such moves are likely to redefine global supply chains in the coming decade, with significant economic and geopolitical consequences for multinational corporations and allied economies alike. Congressman Andy Harris asserted that ongoing trade negotiations are not hindrances, but catalysts for the United States to rebuild more secure and resilient supply chains in collaboration with allied nations. Harris emphasized that by leveraging trade talks, the U.S. can strategically realign its economic dependencies, reducing vulnerabilities to geopolitical risks, particularly those associated with China. Rather than simply restoring old patterns of trade, The negotiations aim to forge deeper, more reliable partnerships with countries that share common economic and security interests. This approach reflects a broader shift toward friendshoring, a strategy that prioritizes critical supply chain links with political and economic allies over purely cost-driven globalization. By reinforcing economic ties with trusted partners, Harris argued that America can better safeguard its industries and enhance its competitiveness in an increasingly fragmented global market.